Disclaimer: the following program is designed to offend, provoke, and challenge your religious sensibilities. It contains content that will likely offend anyone who holds religion sacred. This is for those with thick skin or a taste for the harsh truth. If you're easily offended or cherish your religious views, please turn off now. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You have been warned. Welcome to Troll the Verse, where we break down each Bible chapter and ask the questions everyone else avoids. Today, we're tackling Matthew 9, a chapter packed with healings, moral debates, and a surprise apostle recruitment. Jesus forgives, heals, hires people on the spot, and somehow has a worker shortage despite commanding an army of angels. And if this chapter isn't enough, we've got full playlists for Matthew, Genesis, and Revelation starting at chapter 1. If you enjoy contradictions, theological messes, and watching scripture unravel in real time, check the links in the description. Like, comment, subscribe. No pressure, no threats of eternal damnation. Just do whatever feels right or wrong. All right, let's get into it. Jesus returns home and people bring him a paralyzed man with no introduction. Just fix this. In Mark, the scene is more dramatic. The man's lowered through a roof. But Matthew skips the spectacle. Different priorities, I guess. Jesus doesn't heal the man immediately. He forgives his sins first, which might not be the relief you're hoping for if you can't walk. The scribes don't say anything out loud. They just think, this is blasphemy. Jesus, apparently rocking telepathic abilities, calls them out anyway. Then he proves he has authority to forgive sins by telling the man to walk. And the crowd praises God for giving such power to men, which feels odd if Jesus is supposed to be God himself. In John 9:3, Jesus says sickness isn't always caused by sin. Sometimes it just happens so God can show off a miracle. But in verse 2 here, Jesus forgives the paralytic's sins before healing him, strongly implying that his condition was caused by sin. So which is it? Does sin cause illness, or is it just a random opportunity for God to show off? Next, Jesus walks by a tax booth, looks at Matthew, and says, "Follow me." That's it. No other words, no background check, no faith-based quiz. Matthew just quits on the spot. Apparently, that's all you need to join the apostle team. All right, so shortly after hiring Matthew straight from the tax booth, Jesus is found reclining at dinner with a bunch of tax collectors and sinners. Now, why does this matter? Because tax collectors weren't just disliked, they were traitors. They worked for the Roman occupiers, collecting money from their own people to fund the empire oppressing them. Think of them as corrupt government contractors shaking down their own neighborhoods. For first-century Jews, tax collectors were sellouts, cheats, and leeches. They overcharged, pocketed extra cash, and were so despised that tax collectors and sinners became a stock phrase, because obviously they belonged in the same category. And guess who said so? Jesus. Back in Matthew 5:46 and 47, Jesus literally used tax collectors as the baseline for morality. For if ye may love those loving you, what reward have ye? Do not also the tax gatherers the same? And if ye may salute your brethren only, what do ye abundant? Do not also the tax gatherers so? So basically he's saying that even tax collectors do that. In other words, if your moral standard is at the tax collector level, you're doing the bare minimum. So if we go with this, then tax collectors are the lowest moral bar in Matthew 5. Yet, 2 chapters later, Jesus is chilling with them at dinner. Which brings us to the Pharisees, who are rightfully confused. They ask the disciples, "Why is your teacher eating with these people?" It's a fair question. If Jesus is holy, sinless, and divine, why is he hanging out with society's worst? Jesus responds with one of his most famous lines, "They who are whole have no need of a physician, but they who are ill." So basically, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do, which is a solid metaphor. But here's the problem. Paul later obliterates this whole argument in Romans 3:10, where he declares there is none righteous. No, not one. So wait, hold on a minute. None? Not even one? Not even a single righteous person? Because in Matthew 9, Jesus speaks as if some people are healthy and don't need him. But according to Paul, that's false. Everyone is sick. So who's right, Jesus or Paul? If Paul is correct, Jesus' analogy falls apart. There's no such thing as healthy people who don't need a doctor. Apparently, everyone needs one. And that raises another issue. If everyone is sick, then shouldn't Jesus be eating with everyone? Why is he only dining with tax collectors and sinners when all of humanity is on its deathbed? Does Jesus know Paul's theology? If Paul, a mere mortal, figured out that no one is righteous, how is Jesus acting as if some people are? If Jesus already knew Paul's theology, why even make the distinction at all? And if Paul is wrong, then what happens to Christian theology? All right, here we go on this one. It's a mess. John's disciples come up to Jesus with a reasonable question. Why do we and the Pharisees fast all the time, but your disciples don't? This is simple, direct, no tricks. They just want to know why Jesus' followers seem to ignore a major religious practice. And instead of just saying, because I said so, Jesus goes full parable mode. First up, we get, can the sons of the bride chamber mourn so long as the bridegroom is with them? Okay, metaphor one unlocked. Jesus is calling himself a bridegroom. So who is the bride? The disciples? Israel? Some spiritual concept? Why is he suddenly a groom? There was no wedding, no engagement, no ceremony. If he's the bridegroom, does that make God the father-in-law? And if you're waiting for clarification, don't hold your breath. He never explains this at all. Instead, Jesus just keeps going, stacking two more confusing analogies on top of this one. No one doth put a patch of undressed cloth on an old garment, for its filling up doth take from the garment, and a worse rent is made. So basically, you don't sew new cloth onto old fabric, or it'll just make a bigger tear. Which, okay, right, sure. And this has what to do with fasting. Okay, but he's not done yet. Nor do they put new wine into old skins, and if not, the skins burst, and the wine doth run out, and the skins are destroyed. Okay, now we're talking about wineskins, because of course we are. Here's the gist of the metaphor. Old wineskins are brittle. New wine ferments, expands, and bursts the old skins. Solution? Put new wine in new wineskins. So, does this mean fasting is an old wineskin? The Pharisees are old cloth, the disciples are new wine? Is John's crew supposed to see themselves as a brittle sack that's about to explode? Again, what does any of this have to do with fasting? All right, so let's break it down piece by piece so it's understandable. What is Jesus even saying here? After three cryptic metaphors in a row, the audience is left guessing. But the general idea seems to be he calls himself a bridegroom and his disciples the wedding guests, basically saying, you don't fast at a wedding, and right now, I'm still here, so no fasting. But that raises the question, what does his presence have to do with why fasting exists in the first place? Then he jumps to fabric repair, warning that you shouldn't sew a new patch on old cloth because it'll make the tear worse. So pretty much saying you can't mix my new way with the old way. Okay, so does that mean fasting is an old way that should be abandoned? Is Jesus replacing Jewish customs or just temporarily suspending them? Then he caps it off with bursting wineskins. Old skins hold old wine, new skins hold new wine because putting new wine in old skins ruins both. So now we've moved from weddings to tailoring to winemaking, and the point? You can't force my new system into your old framework. But hold on, if the old system is too brittle to handle his message, why does Jesus still follow Jewish customs himself? Why does fasting continue after he's gone? If the old wineskin is obsolete, why do his followers keep pouring back into it? What makes this even weirder? Just 3 chapters earlier in Matthew 6, Jesus already talked about how to fast properly. In Matthew 6, he says, and whenever ye may fast, be not as the hypocrites of a sad countenance, but thou, fasting, anoint thy head and wash thy face, that thou mayest not appear to men fasting. In Matthew 6, Jesus expects people to fast. He just wants them to do it discreetly. But in Matthew 9, he acts like fasting is irrelevant because he's still around. So, which is it? Should people be fasting or is it obsolete? And if fasting isn't important while he's on earth, then why do early Christians still fast after his resurrection? Because, by Jesus' logic, once the bridegroom leaves, fasting resumes. And what's even stranger, Jesus himself fasted for 40 days in the wilderness in Matthew 4. So why is he acting like it's unnecessary now? If Jesus being a bridegroom wasn't vague enough, Paul comes in later and makes it even worse. Let's look at Ephesians 5 verses 23 through 25, where it says, the husband is the head of the wife, even as the Christ is head of the assembly. Husbands, love your own wives, as also the Christ did love the assembly and did give himself for it. So now, in Paul's version, Jesus is the husband of the church. So Jesus is still the groom, the disciples are still the wedding guests, but now the church is the bride. So is Jesus marrying his followers, or does the bride represent all believers? If so, then why wasn't this clear back in Matthew? And if Jesus is married to the church, then are believers supposed to be his bride? Congratulations, Christians, you're married to Jesus, including the men. Enjoy your gayness. Hope you wrote your vows. All right, so this whole section started with a simple question. Why don't your disciples fast? And instead of answering like a normal person, Jesus drops three overlapping metaphors, none of which explain why fasting is necessary for everyone else but not his disciples. At best, he's saying, now isn't the time. At worst, he's dodging the question entirely. And when you compare this to Matthew 6, where Jesus approves of fasting, and Matthew 4, where Jesus fasts himself, and post-resurrection Christianity, where fasting continues, this whole entire part of this chapter just completely falls apart. A local ruler rushes to Jesus in a panic because his daughter just died, or maybe she's just dying if you read Luke. The details change depending on which gospel you're in, so let's just assume the girl is in some sort of quantum state of existence, both dead and alive, until Jesus arrives. Jesus immediately agrees to go help, but then gets distracted along the way. A woman who's been bleeding for 12 years sneaks up behind him, touches his cloak, and is instantly healed without Jesus even doing anything. So, what does Jesus do? Stops everything, right in the middle of an emergency. Imagine the dad standing there, watching the clock, while Jesus turns around to give this woman a dramatic one-on-one moment, instead of, rushing to save a child. Now, don't get me wrong, great for her, but if you're the father, this is a terrible day to be you. Your daughter's on the verge of not existing, and Jesus decides now is the time to pause and acknowledge someone else instead. The man can read minds a few verses ago, cast out demons, and raise the dead, but apparently he can't multitask. He couldn't just keep walking and heal her on the go. Now, in Mark and Luke's versions, it gets even worse, because Jesus actually asks, "Who touched me?" Meaning, he didn't know. So can he read minds or not? Either Jesus lost his telepathy mid-miracle, or these accounts aren't lining up. By the time they finally reach the house, the professional mourners, yes, that was a thing, are already there, making a scene. Jesus strolls in and tells them, relax, she's just sleeping. They all immediately start laughing at him because they know what a dead person looks like. Instead of clarifying anything, Jesus kicks everyone out, convenient, grabs the girl's hand, and she gets up. If she was dead, why did Jesus lie? If she wasn't dead, what exactly was the point of this whole scene? And why did Luke say she was just dying while Matthew insists she was already dead? Whatever the case, one thing is clear. This is about as confusing as it gets. All right, let's start with the obvious. Two blind men are following Jesus. Yes, blind men who can't see are tailing someone through town. How? Are they just randomly stumbling in the right direction? Are they listening for his footsteps? Or are they just yelling his name and hoping for the best? Imagine being in that crowd, watching two blind guys navigate like pros, weaving through the streets, somehow keeping up. Are they dodging obstacles? Are they just that good at hearing people move? And not only are they following him, but they're shouting the whole time, "Deal kindly with us, son of David." So they know exactly who he is. But instead of stopping and healing them on the spot, Jesus keeps walking, letting them keep struggling behind him. Real compassionate. Then he leads them into a house before actually healing them. Why? Was there a strict no public miracles policy that day? Did he just not want the Pharisees seeing him add to his illegal healing count? Or is this just his way of making them prove their determination? Because at this point, these guys have already completed an obstacle course while blind, shouting the whole time, and somehow finding the right house. What more proof does he need? Then, of course, comes this part. See, let no one know, right? Because two guys who were visibly blind, who everyone just saw struggling through town, who everyone just heard yelling at Jesus, are going to keep it quiet when they suddenly have perfect vision. Imagine how many people they just collided into trying to keep up with Jesus. Predictably, they ignore him and go tell everyone, because of course they do. And at this point, you have to wonder, is this the real miracle? Not the healing, but the fact that Jesus somehow never learns that telling people to shut up makes them talk more? All right, so in verses 32 through 34, we've got another run-of-the-mill demon possession case. A mute man is brought to Jesus. Jesus casts out the demon, and suddenly the guy can talk. The crowd is shocked, saying, "It was never so seen in Israel." A clear-cut miracle, right? You'd think this would be a win for Team Jesus. Well, not so fast, because enter the Pharisees. Instead of denying the miracle, they go full conspiracy mode and declare, "By the ruler of the demons, he doth cast out the demons." So they admit the miracle happened, but claim Satan was behind it, so Jesus just performed an exorcism, and instead of saying it was fake or a trick, their response is, "Ah, yes, clearly the Prince of Darkness is running a free health clinic today." All right, so if Jesus is out here casting out demons and the Pharisees say Satan is the one enabling this, then what exactly is Satan's plan? Why would Satan be undoing his own work? Demons work for Satan, right? So why would Satan let Jesus remove them? If Satan can do miracles too, then what's the point of miracles proving divinity? If Jesus casting out demons doesn't automatically prove he's from God, then how does anyone tell a real miracle from a demonic one? Did the Pharisees even think this one through? Jesus calls out this exact logic in Matthew 12 when the Pharisees make the same accusation again, but we'll leave that until we get to Matthew 12. For now, here's the short version. If Satan is out here sabotaging his own demon army, then his entire kingdom is falling apart. So, congratulations, Pharisees. You just made an argument that makes Satan look like the most incompetent overlord in history. If the Prince of Darkness is actively fighting himself, maybe hell needs a better leader. But more importantly, if Satan can heal people too, then miracles aren't exactly exclusive proof of Jesus' power. Now, are they? All right, so now let's look at how this same scene plays out in Luke and Mark, and as expected, it contradicts itself. Luke 11, verses 14 through 17. In Luke's version, the exact same story happens, but there's one big difference. Jesus doesn't wait to respond. Instead, he immediately shuts down the Pharisees' logic. By Beelzebul, ruler of the demons, he doth cast forth the demons. Luke 11, verse 17, Jesus immediately slaps back with, "Every kingdom having been divided against itself is desolated. If also the adversary against himself was divided, how shall his kingdom be made to stand?" But in Matthew, Jesus doesn't respond at all. He just lets the Pharisees make fools of themselves, then ignores them. He waits until Matthew 12 to finally say something. So which one is true? Did Jesus ignore them and wait until Matthew 12, or did he immediately call them out on the spot? Now in Mark's version, in chapter 3, 22 through 27, we get another version and another twist. The Pharisees don't just accuse Jesus of working with Satan, they claim he's possessed by Beelzebub. And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He hath Beelzebub, and the ruler of the demons, he doth cast forth the demons." Now, Jesus isn't just using Satan's power, he's supposedly possessed by Satan himself. All right, so here are the differences on the screen between the three versions. Matthew 9, the Pharisees accuse Jesus, but he says nothing. He waits until Matthew 12 to respond. Luke 11, the Pharisees accuse Jesus and he immediately responds in verse 17, no delay. And Mark 3, the Pharisees accuse Jesus, but this time they say he's literally possessed by Satan. All right, so did Jesus ignore them, wait until Matthew 12, or immediately shut them down? Were the Pharisees accusing Jesus of working with Satan, or were they saying he was actually possessed by him? If Mark's version is right, why don't Matthew and Luke mention the possession claim? The Gospels can't seem to agree on how this whole thing went down. And honestly, if Satan is out here healing people too, maybe Christians need to start rethinking which side is actually helping humanity. Jesus heals diseases, casts out demons, and even raises the dead, but suddenly he's short-staffed. First, they're sheep without a shepherd. Then, mid-sentence, they magically transform into a harvest-needing workers. Jesus, pick a metaphor. Are they lost animals, or are we farming humans now? Also, if you're struggling with manpower, what about that heavenly army you mentioned in Matthew 26? You can summon 72,000 angels, but somehow you need extra workers. Maybe call them in, or just admit you like the drama. All right, that's Matthew 9, where Jesus heals, then hires a disciple with zero screening, and somehow has a labor shortage despite commanding an army of angels. If you've made it this far, congrats. You're either deeply entertained, mildly horrified, or furiously typing in the comments. Either way, you should totally check out the playlists. We've been tearing through Matthew, Genesis, and Revelation, starting right at chapter 1. So if you like biblical contradictions, ridiculous theology, or just watching scripture unravel, links are down in the description. See you next time, unless you get raptured first.